Okay, so this is going to be part two of the Power Pages segment, which is part of the overall Power Platform technology stack. And when we looked at the Power Pages, I told you in the last video what I was going to try to do was to actually build something using Power Pages, using the blank site template, and see how far I can get and see how hard or friction it was. So what I'm going to do in this video is actually report back to you on what my personal experience was. Is there an opportunity for Power Pages moving forward? What my thought process is, did Microsoft do a good thing or a bad thing in my own opinion? And, you know, moving forward, lessons learned, right? So let's start with what I tried to build. So just like we always do, especially if you're a super pro student, what we always try to do is to start off with a wireframe, right? So you bring this concept and you work with your UI UX person, if you have one. If not, you're doing the best that you can with your skill set and your eye. And basically in wireframes, you kind of go through the different screens. So I kept it very simple. Well, I thought I was keeping it simple. And I really only created these two screens, right? And again, this is going to be a public facing site meant for onboarding a potential candidate and really kind of allow them to schedule like their interview and, you know, find time for an interview, maybe upload some HR related documents as they pass a certain stage, as well as communicate with them how to get to the office, how to get to the place of the interview, where to park, how to badge in, so on and so forth. Now, obviously, I wasn't trying to build that, but this would have been the foundation to that. And to start this off, I know, I guess in my mind, the way I was looking at this was that, you know, you go through a stack of resumes, you figure out which are the 5 or 3 candidates that you limit that stack down to, and really kind of take them to the next stage. So this user would kind of come to this site with an invitation or some type of candidate ID and register, right? Because, you know, they need to create a personal secure space to upload and exchange documents. Again, this person is not part of your organization as your AD. So we need to authenticate, and we will allow them to use some personal identifiable information. And on the surface, it seems like Power Pages or the Powerapps Portal supports, you know, these social media authentication points. So that's one of the pieces we want to do. And then once they select their authentication method, they authenticate, we would take that token from the social media, or if they create a local account, and then allow them to add more color to their profile. And then this will kind of be like their profile on the system. And I really only had those 2 screens. So looking at that, let's kind of just jump right into it, right? Let's jump right into it. So I have this candidate onboarding, and when I created this, if you click on create, I'm not going to go through this whole process for the sake of time, but you will notice that they only have a handful of templates, and one template you can't use. So one out of they have 3. Only 2 of the 3 you can actually use. One of the 3 says coming soon. But then they have this one that's called blank, right? And this is the one that I wanted to kind of try to manipulate in order to kind of make this kind of fit my use case within the wireframe. And once I've done that, this is what I ended up with. So let me cancel out of here in this creation wizard and kind of go back to my dashboard. Okay, I had to manipulate the URL for whatever reason to get back to my dashboard. So here on my dashboard, this lets me see all of the apps or the Power Pages websites that I created. And I'm working on this guy here. So if I go into edit mode, let's just kind of see how this works behind the scenes. And, you know, first take is this studio is drastically different than what we're used to in Powerapps, which was kind of disappointing, right? Because, you know, you're selling me on as in Microsoft, you're selling me that the Power Pages is just one of these items in the Power Platform, one of these technology sites in the Power Platform. And even as an app maker, I expect some type of cohesiveness between these different stacks, right? But in the Power Pages, I kind of get like this new studio. It kind of feels like, you know, you can tell where they borrowed, especially when composing and creating these pages, you can tell where they borrowed from SharePoint and the SharePoint experience for content managers, where you hit the plus sign, they allow you to bring in the widget, and then once you have the widget, you can configure this widget to kind of make it your own. They also borrowed the whole concept of sections, to where you can dynamically create a section, and then for that section you can add a background cover, even a background image, which modern SharePoint doesn't have, which is very impressive, by the way. But you can modify these, and you can tweak these to do a 1/3 right, 1/3 left, or a 3-column layout, dual column layout, single column layout, so on and so forth. So all of that kind of follows that model that we're kind of used to in modern SharePoint. Is it as fluid and nice and slick as modern SharePoint? No, I think that's the opportunity, right? And part of that is that, okay, I create this widget, I configure this image, now I want to move it to a different quote unquote zone, because I created this in the wrong place. Or maybe I have this copy and I want to stack this into a single zone or move this to different areas. I found that very difficult, actually impossible to do. Now, you can move, if you're in the same zone, like this column within this section, you are able to move this up and down, right? But you can't move this to different areas of the page like modern SharePoint. So that, the build process, especially with these pages and things like that, was not 100% there, in my opinion. When looking at this navigation, this took me a little bit to kind of get used to. But then once I saw that, okay, this is main navigation, you're actually using the actual page to build a navigation. Can you do something, a little bit beyond that? Like, what if I wanted to link to something that was not part of this Power page? I couldn't figure out how to do that, right? So this is like what you see, what you get as far as the pages and how you stack the pages, how you represent the pages hierarchy or storage, right, is going to build your navigation. This is one, and this is very surprising, because this is the one thing that modern SharePoint did away with compared to Classic. Classic, you had that. You had to structure your subsites in a certain way in order to get your navigation to build a certain way. And that was one option. The other option was that you can abandon that and you can inject, kind of build a hybrid of the two. But, with modern SharePoint, it's all links. It's independent of your site structure, and everything is flat. And I think that's why it's independent. But I was expecting them to go independent here, right? Because you are going to have that use case where I need to link to something and it's not an actual page, right? It's just a link, and I want to manipulate this navigation that's independent of my actual page structure within the site. So that's an opportunity. Now, here's the piece that really confused me, and actually had to jump into the tutorial and really kind of get a deep dive and really understand how Microsoft expected us to work with this the studio to build these pages. Now, and I say that to say, I try to do as much as I can, because you want to see how intuitive this is going to be, especially with your experience. You have experience in Power Apps. You have experience in Power Automate. You may have experience in SharePoint. Okay, let me take that experience that I have with other Microsoft tech and use this new technology produced by Microsoft from the ground up, granted. And I go in expecting I can leverage some of that. And that's the challenge. I think it seemed like they reimagined this editor, which is very confusing, especially if you're trying to make this fit within the family. Now, and what you see on the screen is part of that. The one thing they did do right, though, I have to give them this, and I think this is where they probably surpassed modern SharePoint. The ability to brand this was really straightforward, and the fact that you get a color wheel is very refreshing, because now I'm not stuck to your presets, and if I really need to dial this in to this 7/9/23/13 red, I can dial it into that, and I can match my branding requirements spot on. And the other thing that what they tried to do was to allow you to create these presets within your brand, and then these presets will be referenced as you build your pages, right? So if you go into the text color, it's going to reference these swatches. If you go into your background color, it will reference your swatches. So that way you don't get misaligned with, okay, you use the 793F, 23F, whatever in the header, but then you were slightly off with that hex color the deeper you dive, because you forgot the hex number or you was too lazy to copy and paste. So I think they did very awesome in that way. the widget game, as far as the functionality and the capabilities that you have, I think is very limited. I'm hoping that they grow that area. And when I say limited, these are they're calling components. I guess in the Power Platform speak, these are the components that you have to work with. So there's no concept yet for just a straight up link. I'm sure you can probably go into the text and hyperlink, but as you can see in the home page, I really wanted to do something with this outside of being a quote unquote button. The fact that this is a button, and again, speaking to the style and the theming guidelines that they kind of lock you into, when I select that component and I click edit, if I click style, notice how I'm limited to the primary and secondary color. Well, I really want to represent this as a link, but I want to go outside of those boundaries. Again, there's probably some UI UX best practices here to where the system is forcing you into that layout. But, again, one of those things to be considered as an opportunity. Now, let's compare what I wanted to do and what I was actually able to do. And I think there's a huge difference. Now, notice how, and again, this probably is not the best first app or first website use case to bite off, because this kind of go into some of the advanced areas of the Power Apps, meaning that defining like social media authentication methods and really trying to custom style those different authentication methods and then reference them some way, somehow. And there's a lot to learn there. There's a lot that's unknown before you kind of get into the basics of, okay, I just want to build a page and link these pages, style it to my company brand, and, voila. And more importantly, integrated with my internal processes already built on the Power Platform, meaning that my Power Automate that would trigger a new item created in a SharePoint list and an email notification to an internal person, all of that we're good with, right? We have experience with that. And now what this is doing is breaking that barrier that says I have an outside scenario outside of the organization scenario where I may have anonymous users, mostly only to a certain point, but then I need those users to authenticate some way, somehow, and then from there that would trigger my downstream process. So even though this may seem like a heavy lift for a first timer, I think it's probably an 80 to 90% use case to where this is really the value add of having the Powerapps Portal or the Power Pages on that outside, integrated with your Power Platform to trigger your downstream internal processes. Holy smokes, they're trying to choke me out. Okay, so I say all that to say this was not easy to style. Now, this is where things got a little wonky, and this is where the light bulb went off when I really started to jump deep into this, trying to build something outside of the template and realizing that Power Pages is, and we mentioned this before in the previous video, is really just a superset or subset of the Power App Portal. And the Power Apps Portal is a monster to manage, right? Because you have so many options and they expose so many items that are really under the hood that you probably should not be exposed to the average app maker, or even more than that. It probably shouldn't be exposed to the average developer, because you go in there and you start tweaking stuff, you can really not only break your site, but break all the sites in your environment. Very, very scary stuff. So I say all that to say, when I got into configuring those authentication methods, let's take a look and see what this looks like before we jump into that, right? So I go into preview, it launches the site. And again, this is a public facing site. So you can use this URL wherever, however you want to, as long as you have access to the internet, you can get to this particular site. Now, when I click on register, I did a deep link to this out of the box experience. Everything that you see here outside of me configuring Facebook, which is actually working, is configured based on my Facebook profile as a Facebook developer. The same is true for LinkedIn. It's configured to my LinkedIn profile as a LinkedIn developer and creating that configuration, which was fairly simple. Once you do one, you can probably set these up in 20 minutes, right? Super impressive. The fact that you can allow a user to authenticate with their social media account, create a profile in your instance, and it only costs you 20 minutes per social app. Very, very impressive. But the problem is, I think with that ease of use and with that ease of setup, you compromise the flexibility to really control this and style this the way you want. So I wanted this screen and this options to be this, right? And I couldn't figure it out because as you can see, this account login or register, this whole URL, what's the page here? Register? Right. So this page or view or controller or view controller is not one of those pages that you would see. So it's almost like a separate, like, okay, these are your site pages. Yeah, these are other pages which are basic, public facing website pages that you need, right? If you click on a URL that's not part of the site, here's your default page not found. If you click on the area that's secure, here's your default access denied. I don't know what default offline page is. In registration, this is one of those things that I moved that was part of my navigation that I hit here because I'm forcing the user to click this button to get to the registration page versus having that up here at the top. It's a preference, right? I can move it either way, but that's one of the flexibilities that I saw. Now, the question is, how do I style this registration page, which is quote unquote a wizard driven page? And now I want to style it to get this to brand and look like my own. And this is where the wheels kind of fell off because you have this option to where you can go into setup. And once you go into setup, you have these other administration options to where you can click on like site details. And I get this, right? Coming soon. We're in public preview. You still got to hammer this out. We've seen this time and time again within the Microsoft 365 stack, especially when they're trying to move like an admin page or a site or a list setting page or SharePoint library page, setting page, whatever, from classic experience to the modern experience, they would have these built-in placeholders. And that's I think it's a fantastic model, right? Because if you wait until you modernize everything, you will never get to market, right? And it speaks to the agile and the ability to, define your MVP, figure out your placeholders, and then when and where you need to drop them into an existing page or a classic experience. And this is what we have. So once I click on that, this kind of lands me into this Powerapps Portal Admin Center. Again, I never built a Powerapps Portal, mostly because the pricing and the licensing costs was really a non-starter. So this is one of those things where, someone who's used to building Powerapps portals, they will be comfortable and they would know to click to make things happen, to make magic happen. For me, I got lost, right? Because I lost all reference to Power Pages. I was pretty much jumped into this area where it was just like, okay, you opened up a door and this is our utility closet. What are you doing in here? And I get all of these different options to really kind of take this portal or website to another level. I mean, I can restart the portal. I can upload certificates. I can do all this binding stuff. But yeah, it's just more administrator, Power App Portal administrator type features and functionality. But again, I don't know how to style this page. Like at this point, I don't even know where to find the page. So then if I click back to the Power Pages, you will notice that there's another option that says Portal Management. And this is even more scarier, right? Because now this takes me to like a Dataverse administration page. And when I say the Dataverse administration page, this is like the glue for all of my websites, for all of my Power Pages sites in this particular environment. And if I go down to websites, yeah, so if I go to, is it web page access? It's one of these. But I mean, as you can see, I mean, this really takes us to a whole new level. I mean, this allows me to define different roles, security roles, and drop users into them and then figure out what pages that security role or what all roles have access to which pages. Some really, really behind the scenes stuff. And I'm hoping this is the stuff that they will amplify or really mute and simplify with Power Pages. And I think once I got into this piece here, a spoiler alert, I couldn't figure out how to style it, by the way. But once I got into these different areas, like one, the portal administration, and then the Dataverse administrator, or portal management administrator, whatever you want to call it, that's when the light bulb went off, and I drew this picture, right? And this is where the relationship was very, very clear. So at the bottom, the most common denominator, you have the data verse. And within the data verse, you're going to have on top of that, and we understand that with Power Platform, you have this concept of environments, virtual environments, right? So if you need to do an application lifecycle, you have to create these different environments to represent this is dev, this is QA, this is UAT, this is prod. And for each one of those environments, you get a dataverse database. And you get one database per environment. And when I went into that portal management screen or the Dataverse admin screen, that's where I saw all of the Power App portals that were created, which are really just pages on top of the Powerapps portal, so on and so forth. So this was like my my one-to-many relationship. I saw those relationships. I saw which tables were used are common across all the portals. And then even within that table, how the foreign key in relation to key to kind of make each portal seem on the surface that they were independent, which in actuality, under the hood, they were all just, segmented out, sharing the same tables. Neither here or there, but something to be aware of, especially when you get exposed to it, trying to configure, security on the page as an example, which is one of those use cases why you would go to this level. The other one was the Powerapps Portal. So again, you can have multiple portals in a Dataverse, or AKA within an environment. Let's just actually log this. So this is the environment, and these are Power Platform environments, right? And by default, you have that default environment, and everything that you do is in the default unless you promote things up to different environments. Now, so you can have multiple Powerapps portals within that environment, and then the Powerapp portal, I think this is a one-to-one relationship. You get Power Pages. And even though we say Power Pages, these are websites with unique URLs, right? And then within the Power Pages website, you're going to have multiple pages, right? And then those pages, and then if you start doing things fancy, like configuring the form, which I thought was very interesting how they do that, or displaying dynamic data, or whatever the case may be. Now you're going to have to go down to the Dataverse and either use a shared table that's going to have information across all Power App portals, or a Power Pages specific table, right, that you will create that says this table will only have this information for this particular Power Page website, right? So this whole hierarchy, the light bulb went off on how this relationship was determined. It was confusing. I have to give, it was definitely confusing, but the reality is, especially if you're really trying to understand how things are put together, because understanding this relationship is going to help you, especially when you start to get into different administration areas, trying to do some of what I would consider some of the most basic things like securing a page. And again, this is public preview. I can't knock Microsoft, and I'm not knocking Microsoft, but because it is public preview, those are opportunities to really kind of drive this very slick, this very low code, no code experience even more forward by trying to do a lot of things for you as an app maker. Okay. Now, where do I stand? What's my conclusion here? My conclusion is this. I think this is one of those scenarios where you absolutely need it, right? Because what's happening, and let's go back to the whiteboard. I hopefully I can illustrate this and explain this clearly. This is what's happening today, right? So you have this line in the sand. On the left side, you have your M365 tenant. And I'm going to keep it that generic, right? Because M365 tenant represents everything. It represents Teams. It represents your SharePoint. It represents your OneDrive, so on and so forth, right? And on the other side, you have the internet, or the area outside of your organization. And the area outside of the organization, what's happening here, and these are becoming more common than not, is that you're going to have these different personas that you need to interact with, right? So you're going to have your vendors, you're going to have your suppliers, you're going to have your customers, you're going to have, in our scenario, candidates or potential candidates, where you need an onboarding process where I'm going to take you as a persona that's on the internet that has zero identity here internally, like in our Azure AD. And then over a series of processes or stages, you would then elevate to an employee status or even a contractor status where you have a username and password within the organization, right? And to kind of help bridge this gap, you have several scenarios. And these are kind of repeats of what we already discussed when we talked about Power Pages and where they fit in the overall solution architecture or the use case scenario, especially when you start to penetrate this line and need to start working with more and more people outside of your organization or outside of your Azure AD. Now, this is where Power Pages really kind of straddle the fence. And so you're going to create this Power Page, which is going to be that extranet portal. And not only do you have a use case where you can allow for anonymous users, right? Because that's what you see here. As an anonymous user, anyone can go to this URL and no one's going to be challenged to authenticate. I only challenge you to authenticate when I link into something that's behind that secure wall. And that secure wall will not only have authentication, meaning that you have to identify yourself. You no longer can be anonymous, but it will also have authorization. And that's why that layer of this is the Powerapps Portal, and this is Dataverse really starts to rear its ugly head, because now to secure a page, you have to go into that level of administration and configuration to say, one, define your roles needed for your portal, and then for those roles, define what they can and cannot do based on the page's level, right? Something to keep in mind. So you're always going to have that, because this is going to be that key conduit to kind of take these personas from the internet and safely interact with them with your internal M365 Power App portals and things along those lines. Does that replace like guest access in Microsoft Teams or a share link, an anonymous share link in OneDrive, or anonymous shared library or folder in SharePoint? No, I don't think it replaced those. Like, I think these are ad hoc, right? To where you're interacting with individuals, or you're interacting with a team that's outside, and really you're just sharing files. But when you need to really expand that experience, really like an extranet, that's when I think these Power Pages scenarios really, really shine. So I think they're absolutely a keeper. I think they all have already been around, right, via the Powerapps Portal. As you can see, the Powerapps Portal is a monster to deal with. And the fact that Microsoft has a sub-team dedicated to making that experience, one, easier for app makers, two, digestible for app makers who are really centered around no-code, low-code technologies and concepts, it makes it a game changer. Now, the fact that it's built on Power App Portals, as soon as you exhaust your capabilities in Power Pages, I don't know what those capabilities are going to be once we hit GA. But once you exhaust that, that's when you bring in your pro dev. That's when you bring in your senior administrator to really help you to configure and take your configuration to the next level. So I don't know. It's a keeper. It's a keeper. Lessons learned, real quick, and I'm going to wrap this video up. Lessons learned, and I think this kind of speaks to what we're already used to or accustomed to when building Power Apps, Canvas apps, or Power Apps, custom SharePoint forms, or even the mobile apps. You're not going to bring in an external UI, UX designer and have them design you something without considering the capabilities or even the guardrails or limitations of Power Pages. That would be a huge mistake. And we know that dealing with modern SharePoint, right? Modern SharePoint, we get a lot of goodness out of the box. We bring in the UI UX to say, okay, these are all of our Lego blocks. We're trying to figure out the best way to position them, put them together, but we're not going to design a new block. We're not going to paint a new block, right? Yeah, you get your branding, but that's all compartmentalized, and you're going to have these slots where you have to work within. So the free reign concept of bringing a UI UX person that starts to float things all over, ignore or redefine the grid system, or doing some of these other very slick things is a non-starter here. Hey guys, not 100% sure what happened here, but my audio during the video at this particular point started to fade out and actually went to 0 for the last 10 minutes of the video. So we're obviously going to have to cut it short. But I think in short, it was really about Power Pages. The position of Power Pages is still a valid point. We see exactly where Microsoft is going. It's much needed, especially considering the complexity of the Powerapps Portal. You would need that low-code, no-code layer of Power Pages to really kind of make this simplified and easy for app makers like you and I to consume, and senior developers and solution architects like you and I to really kind of take the ball to the next level. I think that was it for this video. I think I kind of got long-winded in anyway, but for whatever reason, through technical difficulties, we lost the audio towards the end of the video. But until then, I guess I'll see you tomorrow.